I would have liked to stay with you longer, but I find consolation in the words of Jesus. He tells us, the Advocate, Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you.
After 26 years as the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul II died on April 2, 2005, at age 84. This beloved Pope of modern times, who survived multiple assassination attempts and was an example of true forgiveness, was an inspiration to millions all over the world. Therefore, his death was such a global loss, but while the world was still in mourning, the last words of this great leader revealed a terrifying secret that shocked the world. What did the Pope say on his deathbed, and what consequence does it have for the world? Join us as we examine the last words of Pope John Paul II and the implications for the Catholic Church and the world at large. When Pope John Paul II was about to die, no one imagined he would be revealing some terrifying secrets that could change the world. The 264th Pope, who was beloved by many all over the world, revealed where he was going while on his deathbed. Not only that, he left a message that the world needs to be concerned about.
I would like to invite each of you to listen carefully to God's voice in your heart,
as it has to do with the control and power of Satan on earth. The last words and last gift of His Holiness have led to several speculations as people keep trying to decode the full extent and implication of his words and message. We've studied and decoded his last words and message, which we reveal in this video. However, before we make that revelation, we need to revisit the early life of Pope John Paul II and how he overcame adversity. Keep watching. We're about to uncover hidden information you don't know. Early life of Pope John Paul II. On May 18, 1920, Karol Józef Wojtyła was born in Wadowice, Poland, to a Pole named Karol Wojtyła and a woman with Lithuanian heritage, Emilia Kaczorowska. He was born after Olga, his older sister, had died, which made him close to Edmund, his older brother. Wojtyła had to also experience the death of his mother, Emilia, at age 8.
Many challenges in life, including the death of his mother, Emilia, when he was just 8 years old,
who died due to kidney failure and a heart attack. Death would also take the life of his brother, whom he looked up to since Edmund was 13 years older and also a physician. In a cruel twist of fate, Edmund died due to scarlet fever. Despite all the family crises, Wojtyła was trained and nurtured in the way of the church. He was baptized within a month of his birth and took his first communion when he was 9 years, before being confirmed at age 18. Wojtyła was very active as a young man, which he would continue to be even after becoming pope. He loved football and played in association football as a goalkeeper. This activity allowed him to meet with the Wadowice Jewish community, since Catholic and Jewish teams often played against each other. Sometimes, Wojtyła found himself playing for the Jewish team. As a result, he was always supportive of the Jews as he grew up because of how closely he interacted with them. The interaction was so close that his first romantic involvement was with a Jewish girl, Ginka Beer. This all happened before he became a priest. While he tried his hands at acting, Wojtyła was a very brilliant student who completed his high school education with excellent grades. At this time, the Germans were taking Poles to work in slave labor camps, so he chose to work at a quarry to escape such an outcome. In 1938, he and his father moved to Krakow, and he became a student at the Jagiellonian University. During his studies at the prestigious university and his time in theatrical groups and playwriting, Wojtyła mastered 15 different languages, including Polish, English, Spanish, Luxembourgish, Italian, German, Serbo-Croatian, Ukrainian, Latin, French, Portuguese, Esperanto, Czech, Dutch, and Slovak. This proved valuable for him when he became pope, as he used 9 out of these 15 languages extensively. Don't miss the next scene, where things get even more interesting. Ordination as a priest, election as Pope John Paul II, and inauguration. After the death of his father, who died of a heart attack, Karol Józef Wojtyła thought about becoming a priest. So he went and informed the Archbishop of Krakow, Adam Stefan Sapieha, of his desire. He was accepted and began studying in a secret seminary because of the ongoing World War II. He was ordained as a Catholic priest at age 26 after he completed his seminary studies.
University of Krakow to study Polish philology. He also enrolled in acting school. But World War II and the Nazi occupation would change his plans. To earn a living, he started working at a stone quarry when he was 19 years old.
The Archbishop of Krakow, Cardinal Adam Stefan Sapieha, administered Wojtyła's ordination on All Saints' Day, 1946. After this, he got a license and then completed his doctoral exam on June 14, 1948, before going on to defend his thesis on June 19, 1948. Once he had bagged his doctorate, he went back to Poland for his first pastoral assignment in a small village called Nigowice. When he got to the village, he was inspired by the act of Jean-Marie Baptiste Vianney to kneel and kiss the ground in reverence. This became a custom he practiced when he became pope. While he was kayaking in a lake around northern Poland, he heard the news that Pope Pius V had appointed him as the auxiliary bishop of Krakow. He had to quickly appear in Warsaw before the primate of Poland, Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, who told him of his new role. At age 38, on September 28, 1958, Wojtyła became Poland's youngest bishop. At this time, the Bishop of Krakow never imagined he would be breaking another record in 20 years. Bishop Wojtyła took his new role seriously and started the annual Midnight Mass on Christmas Day, which is held at Nowa Huta on open land since the town doesn't have a church building. In August 1978, after the death of Pope Paul VI,
Good evening. Pope Paul VI, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, died today. He was 80 years old. The Vatican says the Pope died of a heart attack at his summer home in Castel Gandolfo outside Rome.
Wojtyła was part of the papal conclave that saw John Paul I become pope. Sadly, after just 33 days in office, Pope John Paul I died. This sudden death demanded that another conclave be held, and this took place 10 days after Pope John Paul I's funeral. Although there were strong contenders for the office of the Holy See, it was Wojtyła who was voted pope after the 8th ballot on day 3 of the conclave, after 7 other candidates had been disqualified. On October 16, 1978, Cardinal Karol Józef Wojtyła was elected as the 264th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. His election and inauguration were historically significant, as he became the first non-Italian to become Pope in 400 years.
When Cardinal Felici announced the name of the first non-Italian Pope in 455 years, and the first Pope ever from one of the most Catholic countries on the face of the earth, Poland.
Furthermore, at 58 years old, he was the youngest pope in more than 100 years. Just like Pope John Paul I, Pope John Paul II chose to receive the ecclesiastical investiture via a simple papal inauguration instead of the traditional papal coronation on October 20, 1978. During the inauguration, cardinals were required to kneel before the Pope when taking their vows and also kiss the Pope's ring. When it was time for Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, who informed Pope John Paul II of his then role as the auxiliary bishop of Krakow, instead of giving the cardinal his ring to kiss, the Pope embraced the man who had played an integral role in his life. Despite his ascendance to the papacy, Cardinal Karol Józef Wojtyła, now known as Pope John Paul II, maintained a very active life and engaged in several sports and activities. He used to go jogging, swimming, lifting weights, and even hiking in the mountains. Football was a sport that was very dear to him, which he enjoyed a lot. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the different times Pope John Paul II escaped death. You won't believe some of these near-death encounters. The near-death encounters and assassination attempts on Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II escaped death on multiple occasions, including 2 assassination attempts. When he was just 15 years old, the future pope used to hang out with his friend after school hours in his friend's family bar. A certain local policeman usually visited the bar once his shift was over and often kept his gun in the cash drawer of the bar whenever he felt he had had one too many drinks. One day, while Wojtyła and his friend were playing, the friend took the policeman's gun and playfully pointed it at Wojtyła, just a short distance away. He teased Wojtyła, telling him to raise his hands or he'd shoot. Although he was not planning to shoot, the gun discharged accidentally, and somehow the bullet missed Wojtyła narrowly. This was the future pope's first near-death encounter. The second would happen in February 1944, as Wojtyła walked back home from work at a quarry. In a split second, a Nazi truck hit him, and he was thought to be dead by the woman who rushed to help him after she had found his body. After realizing that he was just badly injured and unconscious, the woman, with the help of a German officer, stopped a lumber truck driver and transported the injured young man to a hospital. When Wojtyła recovered and gained consciousness, he discovered he had bandages all over his body, a shoulder injury that disfigured him, causing him to stoop permanently, several cuts, and a terrible concussion. During the 2 weeks it took him to recover, he reflected on this near-death encounter and believed his survival was a confirmation of his priesthood calling. Even after he had become the Pope, he still escaped death, but this time, death came for him in the form of an assassination attempt. On the 13th of May, 1981, Mehmet Ali Aka, an expert Turkish gunman associated with the Grey Wolves, an extremist organization, tried to kill the Holy Father as he got to St. Peter's Square to give a speech.
They heard gunfire and saw the Pope turn pale and collapse, bloody, into the arms of his aides. Pope John Paul II had been shot, a Turkish terrorist who had threatened to kill the Pope 2 years ago.
With a Browning 9mm semi-automatic pistol, Aka fired several shots at His Holiness, and the bullets hit the Pope in his abdomen. This led to several injuries as his small intestine and colon were perforated multiple times. Miraculously, critical organs and blood vessels were not affected. Immediately after the attack, the Pope was rushed to Gemelli Hospital, lost 3/4 of his blood, and slipped out of consciousness on his way there. To save his life and fix the injuries, he was operated on, and the surgery lasted 5 hours. The surgeons carried out a colostomy and, for a brief while, redirected the large intestine's upper part to help heal the damaged lower part. Before the surgery began, the Pope became conscious for a short period, wherein he instructed that the medical team shouldn't remove his brown scapular, which showed His Holiness to be a man of faith who trusted God even with death knocking on his door.
What I do know is that he'd recovered almost perfectly. He would always tell us, "I trust your competence, but I also trust the divine providence."
Thankfully, the surgery was successful, and the Holy Father recovered from the ordeal. In a twist of fate, a nun and other people in the crowd caught and overpowered Aka. They held him captive until the arrival of the police. After his trial, Mehmet Ali Aka was sentenced to life in prison. The Pope did something strange that shocked the world on December 27, 1983. At this time, the Supreme Pontiff had recovered well and decided to visit Aka, who was already serving his life sentence at the time. Both men spoke privately for about 20 minutes, and the Pope said he wouldn't disclose the contents of their discussion, as it was confidential. While that certainly turned heads, people were not expecting that Pope John Paul II would go ahead and state that he had forgiven Aka, and their conversation was one between brothers. With this revelation, the whole world attested that the successor of Peter was indeed living and following the model of Jesus' forgiveness, who forgave those who were nailing him to the cross. As you might expect, people began to speculate on the reason for the assassination attempt, with different theories becoming popular. One of such theories suggested it was planned by the Soviet Union, which wanted to eliminate the Pope for endorsing Solidarity, the Catholic and Polish workers' pro-democratic movement. Many years later, in 2006, the Mitrokhin Commission would go ahead and support this theory. they claimed that the Soviet Union employed the communist Bulgarian security agencies to do the dirty job to conceal their involvement. As expected, the claim was dismissed as ridiculous by Russia. To reveal the extent of how popular this theory was, the Pope himself played it down when he visited Bulgaria in 2002. Pope John Paul II said that the Bulgarian leadership was not part of the assassination attempt. However, it might be that the Holy Father believed in private that the Soviet Union was the mastermind behind the attack, as his secretary revealed in his book, A Life with Carol. Later on, it was discovered that some of the Supreme Pontiff's aides were associated with foreign governments, according to the Italian Commission. However, both Russia and Bulgaria disputed the report of the Commission, using the Pope's public denial as proof of their non-involvement.
Thursday morning in Rome, the Vatican, like the rest of the world, is trying to adjust to the shock of this attack on the life of Pope John Paul II.
The second assassination attempt was not as sensational as the first, but it showed that certain people were not pleased with the Pope within the Catholic Church. On May 12, 1982, which was a day before the first anniversary of the first attack, Juan María Fernández y Crone tried to assassinate the Pope. This incident happened in Fátima, Portugal, where Crone tried to stab His Holiness with a bayonet, but was apprehended by the security guards around. Although the Holy Father was wounded, it wasn't life-threatening, and he was able to conceal the injury. Crone was a Catholic priest who opposed the changes implemented by the Second Vatican Council. He said that the Pope was a pawn used by the Marxist Eastern Bloc and Communist Moscow. After he was apprehended, Crone renounced being a priest and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, where he was also treated for mental health problems. After he was released, he was deported to Belgium from Portugal, where he practiced law. There was another assassination attempt planned and funded by Al-Qaeda that was foiled by the authorities in 1995. When His Holiness visited the Philippines to celebrate World Youth Day, the plan was to have a suicide bomber disguised as a priest who would blow himself up while the Pope's motorcade went through the San Carlos Seminary in Makati. They wanted this bomb detonation to serve as a diversion from the next operation's next phase, where the actual assassination would take place. All their plans were foiled when there was an accidental ignition of a chemical fire, which exposed their location, leading to their arrest a week before the visit of the Pope. It was their confession that revealed all that they had planned against the Supreme Pontiff. All these were the miraculous escapes from death that Pope John Paul experienced. Yet, like all men, His Holiness would finally die and leave this cruel world that sought his life from a young age. Bring out your tissues, because the next scene will leave you emotional as we examine the death of one of the most beloved men ever to walk this earth and how he lived in the face of imminent death. The death of Pope John Paul II.
Death of St. John Paul II. On April 2nd, 2005, the Polish Pope's death was announced at the end of a long illness.
During his papacy, the Pope faced several physical challenges, chief among them the cancer scares he had to deal with. Although he served as the Pope for 26 years, these health conditions affected his health negatively. Apart from the cancer scares, His Holiness was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2001. While international observers suspected this for a while, the Vatican only confirmed this to be true in 2003. Despite these physical challenges, Pope John Paul II continued to actively execute his papal duties. He was a big advocate of love and faith, and he continued to spread this beautiful message to the world even though his body and mind were failing him. At some point, it became difficult for him to speak for long. As such, he resorted to saying a couple of sentences at a time. Further, his hearing ability was reduced, and he also suffered from osteoarthritis. You would think all these would stop him, yet the then Bishop of Rome continued to travel from the Vatican to all parts of the world. The only thing he didn't do during this period was to walk in public. Millions of people all over the world were inspired by this great man as a result of his dedication and perseverance. On February 1, 2005, the Pope was hospitalized because of influenza, which prevented him from breathing properly. On the 10th of February, he was discharged but was rushed back after 2 weeks as the case recurred, and a tracheotomy was performed on him. Later on, he experienced septic shock, which is a severe urinary tract infection with symptoms of low blood pressure and high fever. This infection required that medical personnel monitor and care for him at his private home. During this period, the Pope and those around him believed that he would soon pass on, so he stayed in the Vatican as he wanted to die in the Holy See. As he approached his final day on Earth, lights were lit in his apartment and left to burn throughout the night. Tens of thousands of people flooded St. Peter's Square, where they held vigil for 2 days. Finally, on April 2, 2005, the Holy Father exited this mortal plane 4 hours after he entered into a coma, as a 20-minute electrocardiogram showed that he had flatlined, which was a direct result of heart failure due to the septic shock creating a complete circulatory collapse and severe hypertension. However, he only entered into a coma after he had uttered his final words. The next chapter will reveal what these words were and how significant they are to the entire world. Pope John Paul II's final words. The final words of Pope John Paul II were uttered in Polish to his aides. Translating these words to English, the Pope said, "Allow me to depart to the house of the Father." Such powerful words further display where the heart of this great man was and how he held on to his faith, even in death. His final words are reminders to us all that one day we too would leave to be with the Father if we live for him in this life. Apart from the final words he spoke before his death, the Pope had already prepared a message for the whole world. After the first funeral mass of the Supreme Pontiff, the message was read by the substitute of the Secretariat of State, Archbishop Leonardo Sandra, in St. Peter's Square. The last gift of Pope John Paul II was a message of divine mercy. In his message to all humanity, the Pope spoke about how the Lord, who had risen on the third day, offers all humanity his gift of love that brings pardon, reconciliation, and renewal to the soul. The love of Christ is powerful enough to bring hearts to conversion and peace. The entire world needs to understand divine mercy and also receive it as a free gift from God, which it is. The Pope's message shed light on the Bible reading in the Gospel, where Christ appeared to his disciples after his resurrection and showed them his nail-pierced hands. He even allowed Thomas, the doubter, to put his fingers into the holes in his hands. Pope John Paul II emphasized in his message how much God loves the world, to the point where he released Jesus to come and die for the world. The death and resurrection of Christ revealed the love of the Father. He went ahead to affirm his belief in the Son of God, Jesus, by stating how much he trusts God. He said, "Today, Jesus, I trust in you. Have mercy on me, on us, and on the entire world." Rather than pray for himself or his family during his last days, he prayed for us that we might receive strength to overcome all the temptations of Satan. He said that because he foresaw that Satan would grow stronger and that many would be lured to bow down to him and worship him.
That we are followers of Jesus Christ. And his life, humanly speaking, ended in failure. The failure of the cross.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Finished! Father, to your hands I commit my spirit.
Pope Francis has just dropped a bombshell shaking the foundations of Christian belief as we've known it for years. Pope Francis, the 266th and current Pope of the Catholic Church, has been turning heads since his overseeing tenure began in 2013. Known for his impactful views on Christianity and being a preacher of compassion and love, he's been a great breath of fresh air in the often traditional Vatican. But his most recent revelation has left even the most devout followers completely shocked. In a series of recent speeches and sermons, Pope Francis has been talking about what he calls the true nature of Jesus' death. And let me tell you, it's not what we've been told. In this video, we address this recent revelation and what the Pope has to share to the whole world. Pope Francis addressed people on Easter to share his feelings and opinions on specific topics. As you know, Easter Sunday is a special day for Christians because they believe it's when Jesus came back to life after dying on the cross. While addressing them, Pope Francis talked about how God is always with us, but he also said some surprising things about Jesus. What's not surprising is that this wasn't the first time he said something that didn't quite sit well with the public. He is quite notorious for often saying things that make traditional Catholics uncomfortable, but this time, even his supporters, Orthodox Catholics and critics, were taken aback by what he said. He boldly made some revelations about Jesus' death that no one knew about or had ever heard before. It made many people question what they've always believed about Jesus. Before we get into all of that, first, we need to look at how Pope Francis leads the Catholic Church, and I must tell you that he leads it in a very unusual way. From growing up in Buenos Aires to becoming a world-renowned priest, Pope Francis was known for his simple way of life and care for the poor and marginalized. Instead of living in the fancy apostolic palace like previous popes, Pope Francis chose to live in the much simpler Vatican guest house. He also dressed very modestly, showing that he didn't want a lot of wealth and luxury. During his time as Pope, Pope Francis talked about important values like kindness, including everyone, and protecting the environment. He believed that the Church should welcome everyone, no matter where they come from or what their situation is. Pope Francis even tried to connect with people from other religions, not just Catholics, to help everyone understand each other better. For a religion that some think of as only for certain people, Pope Francis's way of accepting everyone was controversial to some more traditional Catholics. Pope Francis tried hard to keep the crucial beliefs of the Church while also making changes to fit the modern world better. He cared a lot about helping people who didn't have much and spoke up for them. Pope Francis once said that some of the happiest people are those who don't have much, but his new ways of looking at things also caused some arguments about whether the Church should stick to its old beliefs or change to fit in with the world today. While many people liked Pope Francis's changes to the Catholic Church, not everyone was happy with his new ideas about the Bible and Jesus. Some people committed to the old Catholic beliefs didn't like the changes, but it seems like some of the arguments have calmed down after his latest talk about Jesus. Before we talk about the teachings that seem to calm things down in the Catholic Church, let's understand why there's been some controversy around Pope Francis, his teachings, and his way of leading. Trying to keep the important beliefs of the Catholic Church while also making old teachings fit in with modern life has been a big challenge for Pope Francis. Instead of only following the exact words written down, Pope Francis wants Catholics to think deeper about the stories in the Bible. He says these stories have deeper meanings that can teach us valuable things about life today. For example, Pope Francis says the story of how the world was created in the book of Genesis.
In the beginning there was darkness, and then there was light. Experience the awe-inspiring tale of creation as told in the book of Genesis.
Is not just about how things began. He thinks it's a powerful story that teaches us about our special connection with God and our responsibility to care for the earth. Looking at the Bible this way makes its teachings more meaningful for our lives now, but not everyone agrees with Pope Francis. Some people, called conservatives, think the Bible should be understood exactly as it's written, without thinking about its deeper meanings. They worry that looking deeper into the Bible's stories might change the fundamental beliefs of the Church. On the other hand, people who support Pope Francis think that understanding the deeper meanings of the Bible's stories can make its teachings even better and more relevant for today's world. Before we proceed, you need to know some of the Pope's most controversial interpretations of the Bible. Some of them will shock you. What are the Pope's most controversial teachings that have actually divided the Catholic Church? The Pope is known for saying things that make people talk. Some of his statements are quite all right in the Christian faith, but some cause big discussions and make people question his faith, and weirdly, whether he'll go to heaven. Recently, the Pope said something specifically for LGBTQ Catholics. It's the first time there's been any talk about blessing same-sex couples.
Catholic priests can now bless same-sex couples. Pope Francis formally changed Vatican policy today,
Which, knowing the common religious aversion to the topic, is a huge deal. Some people even want to remove him from being the Pope because of this. To understand why, let's look at some of the things he said. Some years ago, there were reports that Pope Francis said something strange. He reportedly said that humans could disappear, and God would make new species. This came from an interview in an Italian newspaper with a friend of the Pope, Eugenio Scalfari, who is an atheist. In another interview, Scalfari reminded the Pope about this and asked about what happens to bad people who go to hell. He wondered if their souls would suffer forever. In response, Pope Francis reportedly said that people who feel sorry for what they did and ask God for forgiveness won't be punished. Instead, they'll be forgiven and can be with God. But those who don't feel sorry and can't be forgiven will stop existing, according to the Pope. He doesn't believe in hell. Instead, he thinks that souls who do bad things just disappear. After this interview, the Vatican quickly said that what Scalfari wrote wasn't exactly what the Pope said. They said the words weren't written down right, so we shouldn't consider them exactly what the Pope thinks. Even though the Vatican said this, there was still some arguing about the interview. First, they put it in their newspaper and website, then took it off, and then put it back again before finally taking it off for good. This, of course, caused a lot of confusion. Some people connected what Scalfari wrote to something the Pope wrote in a book called Amoris Laetitia. In that book, the Pope said nobody should be punished forever because that's not what the Bible says. This made some people think that maybe the Pope has different ideas about hell. In another interview in 2015, Pope Francis seemed to say that even though nobody goes to hell forever, people who don't want to be with God might just stop existing after they die. So, even though the Vatican said Scalfari got it wrong, there's still some confusion about what the Pope really thinks about hell. That's not all. Pope Francis has also said things that seem different from what the Church has always taught about the world's top problems. In 2013, Pope Francis did another interview where he said the biggest issues in the world right now are young people not having jobs and older people feeling lonely. You wouldn't expect the Pope to say these are the most severe problems. Then, he reportedly said that trying to make people become Catholics doesn't make sense and is silly. This goes against what the Bible says about telling everyone about Jesus. Even more surprising, the Pope allegedly said that there is no particular Catholic God, only God. This seems to go against the idea that Catholicism is the only true religion. Many Catholics were confused and upset by what the Pope reportedly said. Maybe the Pope didn't fully believe in some of the major parts of Catholicism. Some people thought perhaps he has a different, more general view of spirituality that isn't strictly Catholic. And if that's true, not many will be surprised. Continuing with his beliefs, the Pope received more criticism in 2016. Now remember, he always says that abortion is very wrong, but his focus on being kind and forgiving has caused arguments. In 2016, during the Special Mercy Year, the Pope said that priests could forgive women who had abortions.
Making another dent in his progressive image, the Pope went off script in his weekly address to the faithful gathered on St. Peter's Square to deliver his strongest criticism yet of abortion.
Some people liked this idea, but others didn't. Now let's discuss what the Pope thinks about money and how the world works. He didn't hold back when talking about capitalism. He said it's not suitable for poor people. He even said caring too much about money, cars, and phones takes people away from God. He said the world needs to be more fair for everyone, with rich and poor people having more equal lives. These words made people who care about fairness very happy, but some said the Pope was talking too much about socialist ideas. One of his most surprising moves was when he said that he was totally against the death penalty. In 2018, Pope Francis said that the death penalty is always wrong, no matter what. This was a major change for the Catholic Church, which before said it was okay in some situations, but not everyone liked what the Pope said. Many people, both inside and outside the Church, criticized him for it. Some high-ranking Catholic scholars were really unhappy with him. They thought he was going against important Catholic beliefs. So they, along with some priests, wrote a letter saying that the Pope was going against the Church's teachings. This letter was published on April 30th on the website LifeSite News. In the letter, they said that Pope Francis was preaching differently from Catholic teachings about marriage, sex, and forgiveness. They said this was the third time they had to talk about this. First, in 2016, they wrote a letter to top Catholic leaders, saying that the Pope was teaching the wrong things. Then, in 2017, they said the Pope was teaching 7 things that were against Catholic beliefs, but they didn't call it heresy. But in 2018, they said that what the Pope was teaching was definitely heresy. That's not even half of it. They also said that the Pope doesn't feel sorry for his actions. The letter said the bishops should say that the Pope is guilty of heresy and punish him. They said that he should be removed from his position as the leader of the Catholic Church. 19 well-known Catholics signed this letter, including Aidan Nichols, a founder of the Dominican Order, law professor Brian McCall, and scholar Anna Silvas. Within 12 hours, more than 1,500 other people added their names to an online petition supporting what the letter said about the Pope. The letter pointed to things the Pope said and did that go against what the Catholic Church teaches. They also talked about the Pope saying that divorced and remarried Catholics can take communion, even though the Catholic Church says marriage should last forever. The letter said the Pope was changing important Catholic beliefs about right and wrong. They said he was making people think that what's right and wrong depends on each person, instead of having clear rules from the Church. The supporters of the letters didn't just do this. For their hands, it got more serious. What do recent supporters of the letter now have to say? Supporters of the letter said they were bravely defending the common Catholic beliefs from changes by Pope Francis that they think are wrong and could confuse people, but critics said it was unfair to attack the Pope's authority. But here's the thing. Pope Francis's ideas aren't new. They're part of a bigger revolution in the Catholic Church that started after the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. During this time, the Church began looking at the Bible in new ways. They used history and culture to understand what the Bible really means. This way of looking at the Bible has led to different, more detailed ideas about what it teaches. But this change has caused a big argument. Even now, some people, called conservatives, are still claiming Pope Francis is changing the Catholic Church's beliefs to fit in with what people think now. They didn't like it when, in 2019, there was talk about letting married men become priests in some places. They also didn't like it when Catholic priests were allowed to bless same-sex couples. This argument is really about whether the Church's beliefs should always stay the same, or if they can change as the world changes. Traditionalists, who want to keep things the same, say that Pope Francis is making the Church's beliefs less important by changing them. But Pope Francis's supporters say that the Church's beliefs can change to fit in with what's happening now. They say that this makes the Church's beliefs more meaningful for people today. They think that by changing, the Church can still be a guide for people, even as the world changes. How the Pope looks at the Bible challenges Catholics to live out the essential beliefs of their faith. He says that we should follow Jesus' example of loving everyone and treating them with respect. He wants us to understand the Bible in a way that makes us want to be better people. His teachings tell us to balance following old traditions and living in the modern world. He wants our faith to be something we practice every day, not just something we believe. Even though some people didn't like what the Pope said before, his recent ideas about Jesus surprised everyone, even his critics. So what did the Pope say about Jesus that was so surprising? He didn't just talk about new ways to understand the Bible. He also said we should act with kindness and love, just like Jesus did. He says that Jesus cared a lot about poor and struggling people and that we should too. During that time, Jesus wasn't some distant figure. He was deeply connected to the struggles of ordinary people. He experienced firsthand the oppression and unfairness under the brutal Roman occupation. He used this perspective to urge Christians to follow his example by reaching out to help and understand those around them, especially those less fortunate. We can see practical examples of this in the shocking revelations made by Pope Francis about the true nature of Jesus Christ on 2 very noticeable occasions. And the first eye-opening moment happened when the Pope visited a correctional center. Despite just recovering, he went straight to presiding over Mass and washing the feet of 12 young inmates from various backgrounds, nationalities, races, and faiths, including Islam and even 2 women. As he performed this powerful foot-washing ritual, Pope Francis gave a significant sermon.
This was the setting for Pope Francis to preside over the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday. The Pope reflected on Jesus washing the feet of his disciples and Judas's betrayal, and he stressed that nothing is beyond forgiveness.
He began by explaining that foot washing isn't just an old tradition, but a gesture showing how we are to be with one another, caring for each other. But then, the Pope took it to another level entirely. He plainly said it's hard to see so much injustice in the world, with people taking advantage of others, people trapped with no way out, and many broken families. Pope Francis said that if anyone has avoided such hardship, it's not because they're better, but because of God's grace. Here's where it gets more interesting, though. Looking those inmates in the eye, the Pope stated that everyone can slip, each one of us. And this awareness that we can all slip gives us the dignity of being sinners, and Jesus wants us that way. That's why he tried to wash our feet, to save and serve us. The Pope backed this up by quoting Jesus, saying that if we listened to his lessons, life would be wonderful because we'd rush to help each other instead of taking advantage, like the unwise teacher. Pope Francis preached that helping others and lending a hand comes from a noble heart, and Jesus today wants to teach us this nobility of heart. But he went even further, getting extremely personal and relatable. He said we might think if the Pope knew our inner flaws, but Jesus literally knows everything already and loves us as we are. Then, he said something even more kind. He said that Jesus is never frightened by our weaknesses. He already paid for our sins. He only wants to accompany us, to take our hand, so life will not be so hard. Basically, the Pope is saying that Jesus isn't shocked by our failures and doesn't judge us. He simply wants to walk beside us, ease our burdens, and love us unconditionally in our imperfect state. Whether religious or not, you must admit these are some of the most uplifting, inclusive teachings about embracing our shared flaws while striving for goodness. Pope Francis enjoys preaching the dignity of our imperfections and Jesus' boundless love for us all, exactly as we are. Those were the most shocking truths that'll last for ages to come. No wonder jaws were left on the floor after the Holy Father dropped such wisdom. As if that wasn't enough, during a recent Mass at the famous St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis just doubled down on his shocking revelations about the true spirit of Christianity and how we need to view one another. Speaking to the massive crowd, the Pope preached that Christians must pray for the ability to look at others with the same boundless mercy and caring that Jesus looks at every single one of us. Not mincing words, he plainly stated that no one is perfect. We all sin and make mistakes. If the Lord judged solely on our weaknesses, nobody could be saved. Expounding on that, he referenced the Gospel of John, showing how God did not send his Son to condemn the world, so it might be saved through him. In that light, we must see each other with compassion and understanding, just as Jesus sees us. He said something worth thinking about. When Jesus met people in the Gospels, he saw their authentic selves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As he put it, there were no secrets before him. He could read their hearts. But here's the main point. Jesus wasn't looking to shame or cast harsh judgment. The Pope said Jesus saw the whole person, not to point fingers, but to embrace our lives, free us from sin, and save us. Pope Francis stressed that Jesus has no interest in putting us on trial or condemning us. Instead, he wants none of us to be lost. The Pope then described the Lord's view of us as the gentle glimmer of a lamp that allows us to see the good in ourselves while still recognizing our flaws and mistakes so we can grow with his grace. But right after Pope Francis, he got real. He admitted how often we failed to treat each other with that same compassionate, merciful lens. In his words, we frequently condemn others, speaking badly and gossiping against them. He then said that we ask the Lord to give us this merciful gaze, to look at others as he looks at us. For Pope Francis, being a Christian means more than just attending church. It's about living out the values of the gospel in our daily lives, showing kindness and solidarity with those in need through charity, service, and empathy. According to him, faith demands rolling our sleeves to challenge injustice and encourage human dignity. Always remember that the gospel's power is not in philosophical ideals, but in unleashing it as a life-changing force for personal and social transformation. What do you think about Pope Francis's thoughts on Jesus' death? Do you think he is right? And which of his other opinions on specific topics, which we revealed, shocked you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content like this.